The Shep Naz Podcast begins now.
Welcome to the Shep Naz Podcast. I'm Joe, and I'm your host today. And today we have the joy of getting to know someone a little better. You may see her as you're walking into the church on Sunday mornings. Oftentimes she's greeting there at the entrance of the sanctuary. It is Cathy Burgess, and there's been a lot of exciting things going on in her life. She's taken some recent trips, but even before that, she was in the process of ordination and was recently ordained this past spring. So we're going to get to know her a little bit better and find out what God is doing with her. So welcome in, Cathy.
Thank you, Joe. Nice to be here.
We were just talking for a couple minutes before we started, and we'll dive into this later, but come to find out, this is not your first time behind a microphone or with headphones or that kind of. So something for you guys to look forward to as we get into this discussion. But, well, let's start with the most recent first.
Okay.
So I talked to you a couple months ago about, we need to get you on here and talk sometime.
Right.
And you said, well, yeah, I'll be ready, but first I'm gallivanting around in Europe. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, my daughter and I had been planning for about 10 years a trip to Europe. My husband and son did a father-son trip to New Mexico and went elk hunting. And so it was time for my daughter and I, Elizabeth, to be able to go on a mother-daughter trip. So
you definitely upped the ante.
Well, I don't know. My son got a huge elk, and they had an amazing time. But Europe was just absolutely wonderful. We went to Paris and London and Edinburgh, Scotland. So my daughter had done the 23andMe, genealogy type thing a couple of Christmases ago, as we knew we were getting closer to going on the trip. And I had always heard, that my family was from England and Scotland and all of those areas. And so when mine came back, I was 100% Northern European. And my daughter Elizabeth is 99.9%. So we decided all of the places we wanted to go based on that. So it was an amazing trip. But London, I loved it. As I wrote in my online group that I have, I just kind of couldn't understand how I felt like I was at home when I'd never been there before. But there were some traditional things that were part of my family that all of a sudden I understood why they were traditional in my family, as they are a huge tradition in London, like having roast every Sunday. They call it Sunday roast. You go to any restaurant there, they're going to have roast on Sunday. And so we got to do that when we were there after we went to church at the Nazarene Church in London. So
that's kind of cool to see how those traditions carried over, and you just thought that was part of what your family didn't realize that was a whole cultural thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And even some of the phrases that my mom would use with me when I was growing up, if I was misbehaving, she'd say something like, "You better mind me." Well, I realized then every time we would use the underground or the trolleys or whatever, all of the things would warn you. Instead of saying caution, it would say, "Mind your head" or "Mind your step." And so I'm like, wow, that's where this all came from. So kind of aha moment.
Well, that's pretty cool. So I mentioned at the top that you went through the ordination process and were ordained this past spring. But before we get to there, obviously there was a lot that led up to that. So we'll kind of start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about kind of your faith growing up and how you came to Christ, because we find these stories so encouraging. As people are listening, they like, you know what, that's kind of like my story. So would love to hear your story about how that came about.
Well, I can never remember not being at church. I was taken to church while my mom was carrying me. My family was very involved in the Lincoln Place Church of the Nazarene in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That's where I grew up. And so it was just what you did. And I learned at a very young age, I had great Sunday school teachers, great children's church leaders. And I learned at a very young age the necessity of accepting Jesus Christ as my Savior. And it didn't matter how old I was, because I realized that, we've all sinned. And so We worked at church camp. My mom and dad were very big at the church camp in Butler, Pennsylvania. That might be a recent news story.
Nobody knew that place existed till about a week or two ago.
Yes, but the Nazarene camp for the Pittsburgh district is in Butler, and so we were there a lot in the summer. My mom worked with the children, and my dad was a night watchman, and then my mom took over a lot of the kitchen staff responsibilities. So at 5 years old, I somehow found my way into the adult service, the morning service, and probably I should have been someplace else, but that was par for the course with me. But I heard the gospel in a different way that day. And at 5 years old, I knew that I had sin in my life and I needed to give my heart to Christ. So I ran across the campground and found my mom, and I said, "You've got to go to the altar with me." And so we went to the altar, and I prayed, and I got saved at 5 years old at that camp meeting. And now, am I saying that everything was great and I never had a misstep? Absolutely not. But the reality of what needed to happen and the freedom I felt. I mean, I can still remember that freedom that I felt at 5 years old.
Yeah.
And so it was something that I never wanted to get away from. And so as I grew up, I stayed in the church, was involved in the church, and started helping in the church in children's church ministries and stuff when I was about 12. And when I was 12 years old, that was the real decision time for me. I was dealing with somewhat of a rebellious attitude, and God was really dealing with me about that. And so I went to teen camp, and during that week, I really felt like God was enlightening me on sanctification and really allowing Him to take that rebellious attitude out of me and replace it with what He had for me and allow Him to completely fill me with His Spirit. And so I did. And at that point, there was a lot of change in my life. I started really making sure that I was having devotional time and trying to find out what God wanted me to do with my life. And so He began to speak to me. And I remember one evening I was having devotions in my bedroom, and I was reading in the book of Ephesians, and I was in Ephesians 4, and verse 11 just kind of jumped out to me, where it says He's called some to be apostles, some to be preachers, some to be teachers, and so on. And it was like this big flashing light came into my mind, and it's like, I want you to go to Mount Vernon, Nazarene University. I want you to prepare to be a teacher, and I also am going to prepare for you to be a pastor's wife. And so I walked out of my bedroom, went into the living room, and I told my mom, I said, "Mom, okay, it's this is the plan." And that was the plan.
Now, at this point, did you have in mind who the future pastor was going to be? You just knew, when I marry, I'm going to be marrying somebody that's going to be a pastor.
That is correct.
Okay.
And so that was a lot of faith journey. Really trusting God that He had that person and that He knew what was best. And He knew where I was going to be and where that person was going to be. And so, but, I will say, through middle school and high school, I grew up in Pittsburgh. There was a lot of opportunities to do a lot of things.
Sure.
And it was at times difficult to find my place as a Christian teenager in a non-Christian environment.
Yeah, like, what is this supposed to look like?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so a lot of my time was really spent with the church people, with my youth group. My youth group was so important to me because it kind of gave me the outlet that I needed for friendship, but helped instill the truth of the gospel into me and allowed me to be intermingling in society and in my school and with other people that were living a completely different life.
Yeah, it gave you those guardrails so that you knew, like, I can still associate with people. I can still somehow be involved in certain things, but I also know, because of my upbringing, because of my spiritual training, that there are certain rails that are there for my good.
Yes.
And to be able to live within those, because you had already recognized that God had a calling on your life.
Right.
And I've as you were sharing your story, so many times when people have talked about their personal testimonies, I see some consistent themes throughout, and it's just evidence of how the Lord works. And when we talk about salvation and sanctification, like there's normally that initial giving in. There's that initial, I recognize my need for a Savior.
Right.
And then there comes a point at which it kicks up another gear where he goes, okay, I'm going to be your Savior, but I'm also going to be the Lord of your life right now.
Yes.
And so you kind of recognize that. And now you're recognizing that you're supposed to be headed to Mount Vernon, and there you're going to prepare. So tell us a little bit about that experience.
The 4 years at Mount Vernon were just amazing. I absolutely loved my time there. Once again, I felt like I'd found myself at home with people, with ministry, was involved in, this will date me, but was involved in like living witness teams, going out on the weekends, singing, and really enjoyed that, loved that. But also, developed lifelong friendships. And God just really opened opportunities for me educationally, where I was preparing to be a teacher, and kind of gave me a narrowing of what He wanted me to do with my teaching degree. And so followed through with all of that. And during that time, dated some young men, some that were going into the ministry, some that were not. But I graduated without a husband.
So you did not get the MRS degree that many times people talk about.
Did not. But I met my husband, who transferred in to Mount Vernon. It would be my senior year. He had gone to a Bible college in Kentucky and graduated from there. So he was a junior, I was a senior. I met him, but he was engaged to someone else.
Oh, okay.
So things kind of got a little interesting. We didn't date or anything. I left Mount Vernon. I graduated from Mount Vernon and moved back home. And I took a teaching position at a little Christian school across the street from my grandmother's house, and was teaching first grade there. And trying to figure out what God was doing.
Like, hey, did I mishear what was supposed to happen?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure. And I thought I was really sure, but I'm not sure. And so here again, trust and faith, and really trying to live according to the plan of God, even when things don't look like you think they're supposed to look. Mm-hmm. And of course, through life, I've experienced that many, many times. But it was October, that following October after I graduated, that I got a phone call from my husband, my future husband.
Yes. Yeah.
And so we talked on the phone, and he asked me if he could call me back like the following week, and I said yes. And so he called me back the following day.
All right.
And I said, before we have any more phone conversations, I need to know if you are still engaged. And he said, no, I'm not. And so I was pretty certain that he was going to be the one. And got off the phone, called my sister, and I said, don't make any plans for the summer. I'm getting married.
Wow.
And we did. We did. But it was a different path for us. I was teaching school in Pittsburgh. He was finishing up at Mount Vernon that year, and he accepted a pastorate in West Virginia in March. So every weekend, he would come in from Mount Vernon to my parents' home. We'd get up Sunday morning. We'd drive to West Virginia, do church at that little church in Buchanan in the morning and in the evening. He'd drop me off at the school at 8 o'clock in the morning and be at Mount Vernon for an 11:20 class. So we did that from March until we got married in July.
All right. So for those that don't know, tell us who your husband is. He's here in Shepherd.
Yes. His name is Terry Burgess. And so we've had a lot of years of ministry together, and he's just recently retired.
So he went into the pastoral ministry, and of course that means that by default you were doing exactly what you felt God was calling you to do.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about the family that you had and how that's kind of been a tradition of ministry in your family as well.
Yes. Of course, like I said, ministry and being involved in the church has just always been so important. And sometimes I think I want to make this clear. It's easy to be involved in the church, and it's easy to do ministry, but it's also easy to do ministry and not really actually have the relationship that we need to have with Christ.
Sure.
So I want to make that clear that it was more than just doing ministry or seeing it as a job, but as a calling and as the goal of bringing other people to Christ. You know, that was the heartbeat of what we wanted to do from the very onset. And we saw that happen with many, many people. But as we ministered and as our marriage continued, we ended up having a son whose name is Jared. And he is a pastor now in Bryan, Ohio. And his wife, Janae, is also a minister. And so they pastored in London, Kentucky for a while, and now they're in Bryan, Ohio. And they, of course, have my beautiful granddaughter, Joelle. So, and then as we moved on in ministry to another church, we had our daughter, and her name is Elizabeth, and she is here at Shepherd and is married Luke Prosek recently, about a year ago. So, when we were retiring, or my husband was retiring, we knew we were going to come to this area because we have a lot of family, and this puts us about 3 hours closer to our son in Bryan. And so it was just the perfect spot for us to land.
Join us for Worship Night at Shepherd Church Johnstown campus on Sunday, August 11th at 6 p.m. Experience an evening of powerful worship and uplifting music where we will encounter God's presence. Bring your family, bring your friends, and let's come together to celebrate and connect. Shepherd Church in Johnstown is located at 280 South Main Street, Johnstown, Ohio. We hope to see you on Sunday, August 11th at 6 p.m. Well, we're certainly glad to have you here. And I mentioned also at the top of the episode that this maybe isn't your first time behind a microphone. Tell us how that came about, that somehow you were involved in some radio ministry and your husband was involved in some radio ministry.
Yes, we had the opportunity to work with American Family Radio while we were pastoring, and we were able to put a small radio station into the church, and it was one where we were able to really engage the community and have other pastors come in and, do promotions for things that were going on in their church, and really allow the voice of Christ to just permeate that small community and reach out into pretty much the whole county. And so that was like a 16-year journey with American Family Radio. My husband did a lot of radio work during that time, and was able to do like some interviews kind of like this. It was a little bit different time in history.
Sure.
But a lot of that on the air type thing, we were able to take the radio station even to some of the community events and interview people and just kind of really help the community see the need for Christ in their life. And it made a big impact for about 16 years of our ministry there.
Well, and now that we've uncovered this little secret, definitely we're going to have to leverage this several times over. So be looking for more of that in the future. And we'll fast forward now to this past spring. You didn't want to get left out, right? So your husband was ordained, your son's ordained, and how did it come about that you felt a call that, you know what, I should be seeking ordination?
Yeah, it was not in a usual way. My husband got very ill, and he was very, very ill, and spent about a month in the hospital, and then had to go into a rehab facility. He has severe ulcerative colitis, and so he was very sick. And it was during that time where God really spoke to me about the fact that our ministry was going to continue, but it was going to look a little different. And so I just knew that He was calling me to proclaim the gospel in a different way, and it was going to be through me becoming a minister myself. And so I began preparing. I, along with my son and daughter-in-law, we all went through the same master's program together at Mount Vernon, graduated together. So that was really fun. Most of the time it was really fun because my daughter-in-law and I we were a lot alike. We would do our papers, and we were always on, Johnny on the spot, had everything done. My son, as usual, he's procrastinating. If it was due at 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock at night, he's still trying to turn it in at, 11:50. And my daughter-in-law and I are like, wah, crazy. But we all made it through. And it was through really the difficulties that we had with my husband's ongoing illness that God began to open up some ministry opportunities for me, and they became more online ministries. And of course, during the pandemic, a friend of mine and myself, we did Bible studies, live Bible studies on Wednesday nights from the church, and we would just put it out through Facebook. And then eventually I began doing daily devotional groups. And so I have two of those. One is called Bright Hope for Tomorrow, and it goes out to both men and women, and just kind of encouragement, living the daily life, sharing scripture, and kind of weaving my life and the truth of the gospel into the lives of others. And let's face it, life can be very difficult. And when we go through illnesses or maybe financial things or changes that we didn't expect in our life, those are the times that God can really get a hold of our heart and our mind and transform us to be the person He wants us to be. Because this is a continuum. What might start as a 5-year-old child is going to look a whole lot different when you get to my age. And so really opened up opportunities for that, and speaking some at different women's events, and hosting different women's events. So about a year or so ago, it's probably been a little longer than a year ago, God really spoke to me about moms of prodigals and how difficult that is.
Sure.
And our family, where everybody was kind of going one way, we had a little bit of a time with my daughter that she was not quite going the same direction. Now that has all changed, but I know what that burden is, to have that on your heart and not really know how things are going to turn out with your child. And so God began to speak to me about another online ministry, and so I started one called Hannah's Heart. And it's for moms of prodigals. It's for moms, aunts, grandmothers. I mean, we live in a society where other people are raising children they never expected to be raising children. And so I have a great-grandmother in that group who's raising a small child.
Yeah.
And so just a lot of opportunities that he's given me that are kind of not the cookie cutter opportunities for a minister.
That's wonderful. And I really appreciate you sharing so many of those things. After we get done here, I'm going to get some of those links from you, and we'll share those in the description here. So if you're listening, take a look in the comments and the description of this episode, and we're going to send you some of those links. Also, you could find those by just emailing us at podcast@shepnaz.org, and we'll send that information out to you so you can be connected to it. So I guess we'll close today. If you would kind of speak to the person that maybe they've had their first career and their second career, and somehow they feel like the Lord is tugging that maybe they're to take a step towards ministry. Speak to them for a second, if you would.
Wow. I've known people that have had those times in their life where maybe God had spoken to them and they kind of shut that down. And later on, God has gotten a hold of them again. And I totally believe that God, when he places a calling on our life, it is for our life. And so don't allow what other people may say or what other people may think is important to stop you from doing what is the most important, which is fulfilling the calling that God has on your life. He will open up the doors for ministry. He will open up the doors for education. He will make a way financially, and he will put you where you need to be. You just need to let him do it, and he will fling wide the doors and let you go right through. So don't let anything stop you.
That is a great word. If you're hearing this today, it's not too late. So there are things that maybe the Lord has put on your heart and he's calling you to do those. We encourage you to take that step. We are all about our mission to help people take their next step towards Jesus. You can also follow everything that's going on at the church by going to shepnaz.org. We encourage you to follow us on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. For Cathy, I'm Joe. Have a great day. This podcast is a production of the Shepherd Church of the Nazarene, Gahanna, Ohio. Email to podcast@shepnaz.org and let us know what you think.